Nike is suffering a record losing streak as slow recovery in China continues to batter the retailer. The company slid for the ninth straight session yesterday, marking the longest downward trend since its 1980 IPO for its shares. We're taking a look at Nike stock here on the day even, and shares of NKE as we pull them up for our viewers on screen. You're seeing them slipping once again. They're down by about 4%. And for those who kind of think back to what the company had to say in the 22 times that China was mentioned in its most recent earnings call, the company continues to really round out how they're looking at the expansion in the Southeast Asia and India, but of course with one of the world's largest youth populations, of course in China, where young consumers seeking top product innovation. Gen Z coming of age is the country's most active generation ever. It's amazingly critical to get the strategy right in that region.
Yeah, and they make about an estimated 14% or so, according to Bloomberg, of their sales from China, from Greater China this year. That number's fluctuated a little bit, but the point is they get a decent chunk of their revenue from the likes of China. So we focused not just on Nike and what's been happening as of late and the slide that it's been seeing there, but we've talked a lot about the other American companies that get a big chunk of the revenue from China. You think of Starbucks off the top of your head. A lot of tech companies also, of course, rely heavily on China. Qualcomm gets a large percentage of its revenue from China, according to Barron's, and some of the other chip makers as well. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind when thinking about China exposure for companies. And then there are also some of the casino companies that rely on Macau that we've seen sort of wax and wane according to the whims of the Chinese authorities and what kind of curbs they're putting on spending at casinos there. So there's quite a lot of companies that fall into this category. Yeah,
there are. And I think for Nike, it's also worth noting here that as we were looking through some of the results from other retailers that carry Nike products, where Nike, even with its direct-to-consumer strategy, which has been wildly successful for the company in driving more of that connection and engagement and being able to even round out more of kind of a digital touch point with end consumers and not have to go through a middleman of a retailer like a Foot Locker or like a Macy's. Of course, in some instances, they still retain that partnership, so you can glean a little bit of how Nike is being impacted and perhaps even in the share price action today, how some of that might be derivative of what we're hearing from the likes of a Foot Locker even. And the mix, the inventory mix and the product mix that's flying off of shelves this year compared to last year, wildly different. Last year, it was all about what Panda Dunks you could get. This year, it's more increasingly about, okay, where are people leaning into some of the different running categories, where Nike is going up against a Hoka. They're going up, and Hoka and Deca are outdoor brands. They're going up against Comfort in Crocs even. But in all of the considerations that the brand has in terms of the mix and where it's sold, creating even more digital touch points that sell at full price has been the challenge in this environment too.
Yes, that's been a challenge for everybody, as we talked about earlier, that the promotioning is back. One more thing to note about Nike. Here we are in the thick of retail earnings season. We heard from Dick's, we heard from Foot Locker, which could potentially presage bad numbers maybe for Nike. We've gotten a lot of Chinese economic data, again, that could potentially, if you extrapolate, be bad for Nike. We don't actually hear from Nike in terms of its earnings probably until the end of September, because they are on a different earnings reporting schedule. So that's just something to keep in mind. You know, yes, they could come out with an update at some point, but in the absence of that, investors are left to just sort of wonder what to make of all of these various cross currents that we're talking about. And maybe, and not maybe because it's happening today, they're going to sell first and ask questions later. Try to verify later, I guess.
Sip some tea leaves the best they can. Do you sip a tea leaf?
You scatter them and you look at them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or you look at them, the dregs in the bottom of the cup, and try to read them. Okay. That's where it comes from.
Bingo.
I don't know how to do it, but that's where the expression comes from.
It's complex.